Hi folks, top of the hour, and hopefully you are streaming in the door, joining us for the Age of Industry Transformation. I'm Hayden McCall, and we'll be convening today's session with three other gentlemen. Matthew Addley will from Infor will run a presentation around the topic, coming at it from the perspective of the postmodern ERP movement that's going on. Derek Lyons as a consultant with the practitioners, and Brett Perkins from Cellnet, who has recently been through a transformation. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll be sending that out via a link to you tomorrow, so no need to take notes. And I think we're also going to send the presentation itself out to you separately, and we'll be in touch with that. So there are some links within it that might be useful or at least entertaining. So without further ado, we'll hand over Matthew to run your presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Very keen to hear from the audience, so just click on the Q&A button in the Zoom pane. If you do have questions as we go through, we'll address them, or we'll have time at the end to cover those off. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Hayden, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for your attendance over the next hour. So I'm just going to spend 10 or 15 minutes just to set things up. So in terms of the age of industry transformation, what do we mean by that? What's the opportunity? And what is the thing that we can all unlock and make our businesses better in doing so? I'm going to start with a fairly bold statement, but I think it will be common sense to most, is that traditional ERP platforms and strategies are inadequate foundations for digital business. And this is actually coming from Gartner, but we believe it ourselves, whilst recognizing the importance of a transactional core and that source of the truth, at the same time, there are so many opportunities around that in terms of sharing information or other sources of information that we want to leverage as a business, that the ERP no longer becomes the one piece of that particular puzzle. And if we look at that in terms of the old traditional ERP, it was sort of one size fits all. In order to take advantage of those additional sources of data, obviously that meant extension or maybe even customization, which was difficult. It was often costly, not just in terms of the effort to adopt the change, but also then through life to maintain that change. And so then what we saw and what we've seen quite often is the emergence of digital silos. So the other end of the spectrum, where the business recognizes that on their expense card or through other means, they can unlock a digital channel themselves, whether that's a bit of CRM or a bit of a little piece of e-commerce or some other type activity that could be used to solve one purpose. But that actually then creates these little digital silos, digital islands. So instead of contributing to the overall corporate knowledge base, you end up with each business unit having its own little repositories, and again, disconnected, unmapped, and creating technology challenges to try and join the plumbing together. And that's where we've adopted the expression postmodern ERP, which is a business application strategy that's built around embracing loosely connected applications. And we call them heterogeneous because they're all in pursuit of the same end goal. And certainly we believe in providing common user experience. Now that may be common user experience across different technologies. So for some users, that's more app-based. For some users, that's more just mobile interaction. And then for others, it's back to the sort of the more traditional screen basis at the moment. But again, increasingly, it's abstracting away from that in terms of voice activation or managed by exception. So not the traditional heavyweight transactional systems. And then secondly, as I mentioned earlier on, is then all these extra sources of information, we need somewhere to put that information that aligns with our core. It doesn't necessarily have to be truly mapped on day one, but absolutely we need to be capturing that information because, you know, it's in the old days, you'd have to identify what were the 6 or the 8 parameters that were the important levers in order to make a decision, be that forecasting or something else. Whereas obviously moving forward, what we're looking at is how do we make that combined with, you know, another 7 or 8 or 20 parameters, you know, and then seasonality, and then something else that the user may have access to that actually then drives a better resolution on that decision. As part of that understanding, it's important to understand what we mean by digital. And we've adopted the expression, it's intelligently connecting people, things, and businesses, because it's important to recognize that, it's digital isn't just integrating applications. It's bringing in that sensor-based information and everything else, which is the things piece. It's bringing people across businesses. So not just within my organization, but collaboration with my customer, with my customer's customer, and also working my way back up through the supply chain that's going to actually bring the business value beyond the traditional transactional purity that we used to pursue. And I've just mentioned integration and collaboration, but we're also talking about mobility. And there's some traditional elements in there as well. We talk about digital as if, it was invented in, 2017, 2018 or something. But obviously, with manufacturing execution systems, if you look at the airline industry with health and usage systems and that sort of ACARs and other information sources, there's been elements of that around for a long time. The difference now, though, is the scale and the volume of information that's available to us. And one I heard about recently was, if we think about 10 years ago with baseball, it was the money ball aspect, the fact that I could build a better team out of analyzing players' performance. But now that's gone to a level with sensor bases, with cameras and with visual recognition, and obviously the motion sensors, not only on the person, but on the ball as well, so that you're training the individual to be the best that they can be. Does that mean you can create a new all-star? I don't know, but it certainly means you can improve the individual, because the cost of collecting and analysing that data is reducing all the time, which means that we can focus down onto ever more difficult problems. And then obviously, I would argue that you're then dependent on elastic compute, typically provided by the cloud, to allow you then to romp all over that data and make some intelligent decisions from it. Another part that I would
all over that data, I like it.
That's the technical term, I believe, Hayden. That's okay.
Noted.
So another part to that is then to decide what we're doing with these digital means, and a big emphasis is always on automate. So that's again back to integration, back to workflow, bringing more intelligent decisions into the things that we already do. Be that the combination, if we think about an AP process, combination of invoice scanning, then into OCR, then plugging the data into the right places, making automated decisions where we can. If it's within a threshold, then just pass it all the way through. Don't touch, doesn't need to be touched by a human hand, just as one example. But we go to the other end of the spectrum to differentiate, and can we actually create a different experience or provide additional value that we didn't provide before? So whether that's just the content and the information that's associated with a product, making that far more accessible, or whether that's actually then providing information in a way that's directly consumable by the user. I was talking to a plumber's merchant who they increased their market share just by understanding what their customers were doing with the finance information that the invoices that they were providing, and by packaging it up in a way that the plumber could quite easily plug it into their very simple finance packages. Plumbers recognised they got their Saturday afternoons back. They could go and watch the footy instead of sitting there having to type in invoices. So, it's thinking about what can we do at low or minimal cost that actually adds a much higher value to our customer. Or again, let's look back up the supply chain. What information can we provide to our suppliers that makes our supply chain even more robust and maybe over time reduces the cost of product as it comes through that supply chain? So a lot of opportunity there, and we can categorize them in those different ways. And that then helps us communicate that across our businesses to make sure that they're fully embraced and adopted. But part of that as well, every transformation journey will be different. The priorities, the value, the circumstances are always different, but there's a lot of things that are common across different industries, and certainly within industries, and the sort of the big headlines there, the big five, in terms of the networking, that collaboration, increased customer experience, or as I say, customer experience, digitizing the workforce, enabling people to work in the most efficient way possible. And one of the things I see today is we're quite quick to make it easier for the end customer, but it's sometimes easier for the end customer to interrogate our back office systems than it is for our employees. We haven't done that bit in parallel. And so we need to make sure that alignment takes place as well. Smart equipment, we all know about sensors. We carry a package with us everywhere we go, which has got G sensors, location tracking and everything else with it. And so you think about those possibilities and how they can be explored. And then with that increased understanding of information, knowledge, where something is, how it's being used, then we can consider moving from a sell the product model to a lease the product and additional services model, what we call servitization, where we're providing that not only the availability of that product, but also those value-added services at the same time, and of course, looking to charge that premium for them with that. And so that we're helping customers do that right now across the board. And then my mantra, if anyone's connected with me on LinkedIn, if not, I would encourage you to do so. I'm not a prolific poster, but probably around once a month or so is something I've picked up around my favorite topic, which is being prepared to reinvent your wheel, where we're looking at what's happened in the past. I mean, how often do we sit in a meeting and says, oh, we don't want to reinvent the wheel? Well, actually, let's carry on reinventing the wheel. We have done as human beings since that first stone wheel and a bit of a tree, or maybe it was all wood. I don't know if the archaeologists have solved that one yet. But certainly, you know, we can do different things with it. And where that really comes out is then if we think of the flywheel, and this is credit to Jim Collins, the author, the books like How the Mighty Fall, looking at how do we use a growth in one area to then promote an improvement in another area that then improves our business in another area. And we can actually identify those 4 or 5 tenets that are important to us as a business and use those as our focus. So this is Amazon's use case, where first and foremost it was book selling, so quite a limited selection, but creating a great customer experience, and through that generated more traffic, which encouraged more sellers onto the site, which then expanded their selection. And at the same time, by having a greater market share, they were lowering their cost structure, which meant they were able to lower their overall prices, which gave a great experience overall. And there's a second part to that, which is in line with that reinventing the wheel. There was a gentleman at Amazon back in the early 2000s, Benjamin Black, who was the web development manager for that retail piece. And as he was virtualizing servers, he identified a business opportunity there. And he promoted that idea internally. It was listened to. It made its way up through the chain all the way to Jeff Bezos, who beat up the stakeholders and launched Amazon Web Services, now a $3 billion business. So it just shows how it's important to listen to, you know, the experience and the knowledge of our employees, and not just quash it and get people to focus on their day job. The opposite to that, as I'm sure many of you know, is John Lasseter, who was working at Disney in 1995, said, hey, digital animation, that's the new thing. And they said, back in your box, it's all about traditional animation here. So he went and joined Steve Jobs at Pixar, which then Disney bought for $6 billion back in 2007. You know, so if they'd have just listened to him, that would have probably saved them a few dollars off the bottom line. Would have ended up in the same place. So, you know, history is a great equalizer. But yeah, it's a great thought process there. And we are, you know, can't change the fact that I work for Infor. We as Infor, we're doing a great job supporting our customers through that process. Others are doing this too, and that's making sure that ERP takes its place as the foundation. It's not being replaced as that foundation piece, but what it is exposing data to the network. It's providing an information platform for all the stakeholders that have relevance to interact with that information, but focusing on things like security and so on as part of that. Designing it not only to work with the human beings, but the robots and the things as well, to make sure that we're doing the best things at all times. And I really mean anytime, anywhere now. You know, we know that from the way that we all work. You know, we're just at home in the cafe or the airport lounge, monitoring the transaction as we are in the office space. So, and increasingly as well, when I talk about managed by exception or the use of machine learning and analytics, I'm dealing with fewer and lesser exceptions than I maybe was in the past. And that's where, you know, that decision support is including many more parameters than it used to. So that elastic compute, cloud computing for the advantage certainly is the direction that we're seeing. I mean, it's not a case of this is our opinion. We're seeing it in the marketplace, and sort of here in Australia and New Zealand, we're ahead of the curve, I think, in terms of that level of adoption. I certainly see more growth here than in some other parts of the world. Infor have got their approach to that platform. So I mentioned security and the importance of that. I also talked about homogeneous applications, so user experience, going beyond just what does the user interface look like, but how do I interact with it? What are my options? And that then becomes platform as a service. The importance of connectivity, we've talked to that, and the need for open integration, but then it goes into API gateways and orchestration as well, because we don't want every integration to be a one-to-one basis. We need to have some sense and control around that. IoT, sensor-based, and I talked to the fact that some of that's legacy and some of that's new, but certainly the cost to enter is reducing. But then there's still the need to be localized and think globally but operate locally. So we need to be compliant locally. We need somewhere to put it all, and that's data lakes, and the need for the structured and the unstructured data to live side by side and have a mechanism of understanding that, and then bringing in artificially intelligent means, machine learning, image recognition, digital assistants to prompt me what I should be looking at. All of those things, they're not around the corner, they're here today. What we're just doing is working on the use cases. Where does it add value rather than just become another shiny toy? And this is the way we think of it, both in terms of design thinking, digital transformation, the platform all the way up through. If you get the foundations right, then you can, I'm not a big fan of fail fast, but certainly you can try things out and connect them in at a lower cost, see whether they work, make quicker decisions because you've got the analytics to diagnose whether it's successful or not, and then move on as quickly as you can from there. So for me, they're the elements that I think are important in the age of digital transformation and the age of industry transformation with that. But then it's just a case of the staircase or some other means. I mean, this isn't the only means of plotting that out and communicating across the organization. We think of it in terms of a staircase, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything on step one before you go to step two. If you're field service operating as in this sort of example, it might be that you look after the customer first and how they interrogate you and your systems and integrate with that all the way up to contact zero, so reducing the customer service footprint. And then in parallel, you might start the mobile field service and sensor-based information coming through. You don't have to do one or the other. If you get the foundations right, you can do each at their own pace. And that's an important part of our vision moving forward. And then I'll end on a statement around the importance of partnerships. This one's from Accenture. McKinsey are talking at the moment as well again about supply chain 4.0 and how those who collaborate through their supply chains are seeing marked revenue growth improvements over their peers. By working up and down the supply chain, we can all work better for better outcomes. And it's that value-centric, value-sharing approach that I think the digital means are going to encourage, and I hope that's where we're going to see the successes. And with that, I'll end my sort of introduction piece. I hope it was useful to set up a foundation for what I'm sure will be a very interesting panel discussion. And with that, back to you, Hayden.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Matthew. It's always interesting when an ERP vendor says the way we do ERP is maybe not the best. Good to hear that things are moving on. So we'll open up to the floor and maybe just with a couple of sort of frame-up questions to introduce you guys. Brett, firstly, at Cellnet, you've been through a transformation recently, and Infor technology has been involved. Surprise, surprise. But some of the learnings that you've experienced, are they borne out in what Matthew's presented today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to be the first person to get up and say that everything you see on a set of slides from a vendor ends up being reality. I think ultimately the change of time sees lots of that stuff come through, but we upgraded from a previous version of M3, the original one developed by Lawson that we had implemented in early 2000s, So when we eventually made a decision to go and upgrade, we basically had three predefined outcomes that we wanted to expect. One, we needed to go to a cloud solution as part of our broader cloud-only strategy as an organisation, which meant that we needed to find a vendor that not only had a cloud solution on the day, but we had confidence that would take that cloud solution into tomorrow. As primarily as a wholesale importer and distributor, there's nothing magical about distribution. So what we didn't want to do is impart our potentially poor business process on an ERP that's built for the vertical of distribution. And so the second principle of our upgrade was that we would not customize the product. So we really needed to find as best out of the box fit for purpose as possible. And three was in an age where you might argue that distribution is not necessarily the first business model that you'd want to start up if you're a greenfields, we needed to find an ability to remain competitive. And so how would we drive competitive advantage as a distributor, and what the platforms underneath would support us to do that? I think obviously Matt referred to, Burst briefly in terms of, business intelligence. As an organisation, we have lots of data. The problem is that we needed to turn data into information. From information, we needed to be able to get insights. And then from those insights, how would we generate actionable intelligence? It's probably a term stolen from the CIA or some other federal body, but what platform could we use to do that? And when we looked at all those things, Infor ticked most of those boxes, and in an area where they may not have had the capability to deliver against our medium to long-term plan, neither were we ready to engage in that. So it was really about aligning those. So I feel so far, we're about a year or so into our deployment of the version of M3 that we use from Infor. Things are looking pretty good.
So the decoupled architecture and taking the best bits came into play, and you brought in your distribution network and your external parties.
Yep.
How have they engaged with what you've done?
Well, I mean, you can look at the ERP traditionally, and Matt talked about this too, as an ability to raise purchase orders and do your accounts payable and receivable. It's no more exciting than that. But what it does have is an enormous amount of data, and the system that Infor have developed as part of their Infor OS strategy means that it gives us some flexibility and scalability to connect with our customers. So as an Australian New Zealand business, we do most of our trading with our customers via EDI, via Edifact and virtual networks. So the ability to be able to have a business processing layer on top of the actual engine of Infor was incredibly useful. When you look at AI, we need to find areas to improve our productivity. And I think, Infor will talk about, or many people will talk about AI as a three-step strategy in terms of, how do you assist employees? How do you then augment their capability? And ultimately that end game of, well, how do you automate or completely remove the manual side of the business? And so when you look at, Infor Coleman and what it has the potential to off their genuine multi-tenanted platform, that allows us then to focus on line of business application without the fear of having to, well, how are we going to integrate with our underlying ERP, which is actually generating and carrying the heavy lifting of our day-to-day transaction. So, it continues to work for us. We're not as integrated up the supply chain with our suppliers. Generally, our suppliers come out of Southeast Asia, so it's a little bit more difficult to have genuine integration. But we've already started the process of tightly integrating with one of our major suppliers so that we do things like item synchronization and creative purchase order management. The next step is to look at our international freight services and looking to engage and couple our ERP with our freight forwarder. We use 3PL in Australia, so we already have an IT interface that manages all of our order release and pick, pack and dispatch. So already the Infor ERP is indispensable in our business in a genuine multi-vendor environment. And Matt talked about, a heterogeneous environment, and we certainly represent many aspects of that.
Good stuff. Just a reminder to the audience, we're very open to hearing questions from your end. As per the screen, just click on the Q&A and fire it away. Okay, Derek, so you've as a consultant across numerous industries and businesses, take us through a little bit of your background, but also how you see this ERP at the centre of the universe world, and is that something that's seen delivered success in the environments you've been in?
Yes, I've worked in a number of organisations. ERP is the centre of the world, but only in terms of it enables standardisation and assurance around your core financials or core ERP processes. The bit where the openness comes in is you think of an example of if you've got an outsourced partner who you're using to do maintenance, as an example, using GIS systems, you actually need that open interface to share information back into your core systems. And it may be in 5 years or 10 years' time you want to change that partner. And they'll have their own systems again. And that's where the openness comes in. It becomes quite key of how you share that information, how you have that ability to change the solutions as you go, but you're not tied into one system that just has everything in it. You need the open interfaces and the ability to share information. And without that, it starts to impact your business, and especially when you're looking to work with others, not just yourself. And it's very few businesses that can survive on their own these days. They actually have to integrate with their partners pretty closely to share information. So it does become quite key.
Okay, so I guess there's an emerging skill set then, and there's a human as well as technical skill set required in order to deliver that openness. You can't operate in this world unless you have the ability to actually deliver on it.
It takes quite a different concept of how you do it, because you're not doing your traditional, it's less almost of a technology and more around what your business is and what your information is that you need to share, which is quite a different approach. You're no longer purely going in to go, hey, look, what is the technology and what is the tool sets we're going to use? It's actually about how you're going to bring it together. So it does require a very different approach and quite an open approach to going, actually, we won't use product A or B, we're going to do C and link it back. So it is very different people mindset and how you work it. And it is very much driven though from a business side. What does the business need and what is the functionality or what is the bits they need to make their business work? As opposed to very traditional, let's go and spend 6 months with a whole lot of technical people in the back corner figuring out how we get two things to talk to each other. Because by the time 6 months has gone by, you're done.
Yes, and everyone's frustrated with the lack of progress in the meantime. Yep. Okay, so I guess Matthew, you paint a rosy picture as we would expect you to, but you go into environments where there's pieces missing, and how do you navigate your way through that? I guess we're talking in the same realm here, but integration becomes key. Is it a technology play, or is it more of a human? To Derek's point, it's a different way of thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, Derek makes a very strong point there that we do need to think about this differently. I mean, one of the things I bore people to tears with is just talking about focusing on outcomes, not just not the need, but what are we trying to achieve overall, so that we make sure that what we're accomplishing is the holistic goal, not just sort of someone pre-diagnosing and identifying a step along the way. Having said that, the information today, once we have diagnosed what the information that we're trying to bring together, that might exist across multiple sources. And so then it's a case of identifying what's the effort, what's the value, what's the confidence that we're going to bring to this information when we do bring it together. So having an information sharing platform, so going beyond just a traditional middleware, but something that's going to allow you to align and map that information, something that's going to allow you to bring in information from Excel spreadsheets, informal databases, as well as, potentially more than one ERP. If you're going through a consolidation exercise on your way to a transformation, then there could be multiple sources there. So whilst on the one hand, we're focused on, XML, and we use OAGIS open standards, so industry open standards, to allow us to be more plug and play. But equally then is we need to recognise that not everyone's on the same level of maturity. So how do you sort of bring in those flat files and everything else that goes with it? So you've got to have a tool set that not only is forward facing and opening up to what we're going to do in the future, but what are we doing today? And then secondly is, again, that effort versus value consideration. Do we allow a short-term sort of disposable integration, something a little bit more point to point, just to get us over a hurdle so that we can understand as a business the value of that information and create some momentum behind it? But if we do that, it's recognising and having, an expiry date on that as well, so that we recognise as part of an aligned strategy that, there's an overarching interoperability strategy as part of a broader digital strategy that's going to move us forward in the future. But maybe we do need to do something in the short to medium term that gives us that richer information space. But equally, making sure that we've got the confidence with it too. We don't want something that's going to be falling over every 5 minutes. And that's where a more mature platform certainly comes into play and consideration. But, again, horses for courses. You're not going to do everything on day one. Time and again, we've seen that Big Bang creates its own problems, and not least the dynamic nature of business today and things changing underneath you, to the point about going in a dark room with technology for 6 months. You may have met what was the objective then, but it's maybe not the objective now. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and so it's various means of whether it's the functionally integrated digital ecosystem, so bringing together your customers, suppliers, and everything else, and understanding what information sources are out there, whether it's the staircase or whether it's just a more traditional two-axis value versus effort kind of approach. I would just encourage people to plot everything down, and then you can actually align those pieces in terms of priority and sequence, and then understand is there, something that you would have otherwise ignored because it's a slightly heavier investment up front, but it's going to pay dividends when you look at the overarching outcomes that you're seeking.
Okay, great, thank you. Derek, again, with experience across multiple sites, is there a common thread on the flip side of this where you've seen failures or lack of progress and stagnation? Are there components missing that have meant that has happened? And what's your experience and where those things have come from?
A lot of it comes down to people not understanding their information or their data, and I say both quite clearly because there is a difference between the two. And it's actually, when you don't understand it fully, you tend to miss pieces, and then you start making assumptions about what's there. A really good example I've seen recently is an organisation that goes, we've got these problems in one area, and everyone looked at it and goes, that's really good, we know exactly what our problems are. What they didn't realise, there was 2 other areas of the business they hadn't actually looked at because the information wasn't there for them. People filled in the gaps and went, oh, it's there, so therefore we assume everywhere else is fine and we can go ahead and ignore those areas. So it's actually understanding what the information you have is and where it sits becomes key, because when you get into this level of actually integrating and transforming, understanding that data and information is the key bit. Because humans do kind of fill in the gaps. They're very good at it because everyone wants to have a complete picture. And it makes it an interesting experience when you don't think of that as you're working through it.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know until you get into trying to achieve a process that runs across all of your divisions and out to your customers and from your suppliers. Suddenly, your eyes need to be open a bit wider, right?
Yeah, everyone makes assumptions. So unless you know there's truly a gap there, what you tend to do is fill it. And you actually need to understand, hey, no, wait a minute, there is a hole, we've got to treat it as a hole, and we've got to deal with that. And that's where a lot of the things become problematic, when you don't realise you've got a hole in your information.
Okay, Brett, just in your experience of having been through this recently, and talking about CellNet, you can obviously bring in other experiences. Customer-facing aspects are obviously critical in a digital transformation, but how do you ensure that you're kind of keeping that focus on the customer's outcome, and where do the staff's needs come into that? Just sort of balancing the two, I guess.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to try and hit the trifecta here. So I think that, as part of any any business operation, whether it's business as usual or transformation or whatever phase your organisation happens to be in, you've got to maintain focus on the client and customer experience, right? It's critical. There's a saying that there's no customers, no problems, right? Well, no problems, no business. So you have to focus on that client experience, and all the research that's going on in the market at the moment. And you can listen to Gartner or Forrester or McKinsey or whatever. It's all about, well, the customer experience is really driven by the employee experience. Happy employees drives just naturally a better business outcome, whether it's your ability to transform or to respond, or just to be able to offer better value for service as part of that. And I think as part of that employee experience, you have to think about the digital experience, and that's what are the tools, what are the systems and processes that you're using to drive that. So from our perspective, the focus was, it was great to be able to migrate from one ERP to another, but we needed to do it without dropping the ball, by maintaining business continuity and taking the balance between the front office of our business, which is taking the pressure of dealing with customers, and the back office, which was trying to keep the business going. And so when you look at what we've done to date, it's a multi-phased approach, and always needs to be, because you have to be mindful of the big bang approach in any project. Is that, let's just get the core of our business settled down. Let's make sure that we can still efficiently, or more efficiently, drive the transactional nature of our business. And then the next step is, well, how do we leverage that to engage with our customers better? And like I said before, and Derek, obviously mentioned then, it's all about information. And if you can present being able to respond better, more efficiently, based on the information that you have coming out of your environment, and that information's got to be qualified, it's got to be accurate, it's got to be timely, then it's difficult to not be able to provide a better client experience because of it. So whether you're an IT director or a COO, CEO, CFO, it doesn't sort of matter. You've got to be focused on what we're trying to achieve here, and that's with engaged employees, you get better customer experience, and hopefully, if you're a publicly listed company like we are, then you have happy shareholders. So it's business 101, but certainly more difficult these days when you think about the timing and pressure, and you can't have a conversation like this without dropping the big D word, which is disruption. And how do you either prepare for that, or in our business, we don't want to be disrupted. We want to be ones doing the disrupting. So how do we leverage our technology investment and the investment in our people to allow us to continually drive the markets for which we operate in? So to answer the original question, is that the client experience has to be the foundation for measuring whether or not an activity or a program that we're doing is actually going to provide value. And if it doesn't, or it's not tangible enough, you've got to think about it.
To the extent where you'd bring customers into the project environment, is it something that you kind of deliberately went through?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for our major customers, you have to consider the impact on them. As a wholesale distributor, though, there's very few touch points in terms of what you need to get right. So, and a lot of it, like I said earlier, it's all through EDI. So most of this stuff is automated. Once someone pushes a button that they want to buy something, we have an order in our system, and off we go trying to fulfill it. But when you look at our more small to medium enterprise customers who transact through us through our e-commerce platform, right? Then obviously it's a much deeper engagement, because they're not dealing with our people in our business. Now they're dealing with, traditionally quite an impersonal front end to our business. And so, how does the ERP and our data warehouse, enable our e-commerce platform to have a better conversation with our wholesale customers? And if anybody listening to this, deals directly with the consumer, then obviously, you've got to increase that by magnitudes, because now you have far more of those than you do if you're wholesale. So, it's taking that measured approach, understanding what's important to your business, what drives revenue, what drives margin, and making sure that you put in the appropriate effort, to address, those people who are transacting with the business.
So I guess, and you touched on it there, the data warehouse and the data and analytics aspect versus the transaction engine.
Yeah.
and bringing those two things together seems to be a huge challenge for a lot of organisations. Is that, I guess, is it end game to bring context to transactions so that you don't have to go and run the report, you don't have to be running, sequential reports, you've got in context right in front of you that ability to make a decision because of the circumstances of the transaction.
Yeah.
Is that, and open to the floor really in terms of delivering some of that, Matthew? You're nodding. Maybe just provide your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one day it'll just be a magic green button, of course, where the machine learning and the intelligence has again that phrase romped all over the data. So publishing out from your transactional system also into that data lake. So it's just part of that structured, unstructured whole to provide that decision support. In the short to medium term, and by medium term I mean anything up to 50 years, I think in this case, till we get to that magic green button, is what are all the nuances? What are all the different aspects that we're controlling? How do I break it down in terms of what are the important drivers? What are the indicators of something, coming off the wheels? Is it, a spike in deliveries, or a spike in orders due at a certain time? What are the indicators that I can deal with today that if I can be provided, then either in the first step using my experience, and then increasingly just getting the alert to say that the machine has detected this trend or this scenario occurring. And then in the fullness of time, obviously you're using that intelligence to actually solve those problems as well. Well, how can I spread my orders across, maybe use a second DC, even though locale one would normally be preferred because of bandwidth issues. It's probably better to split the orders across two and make sure they're all satisfied, and maybe I can consolidate the freight at some point along the way, depending on the channels that I use. So it's using, sort of more ideas, which typically no one person would have today, but the only way you're going to present them to them is through, in that first step, is that in context sort of analytics, alerting and those sorts of things. And then, gradually we can turn up the temperature and provide more automation in terms of prompting and then actioning the response as well, or at least that's my view.
No, I agree there, Matt, in terms of, predictability. So, right at the moment, most ERPs are only as good as the business rules that you code into them, right? So, when you want to look at, predicting outcomes, this is where, the smarts of ERPs, show great promise, So having a look at the system going, well, I see that this particular supplier is delivering to you later and later and later. And even though it hasn't caused you a problem yet, if they continue on this trend, maybe you need to talk to them about lead times. Or, hey, you have demand and forecasting systems, but they're not smart enough to recognize that one customer is buying a particular product or a particular range of products more or less. And how does that sensing get enabled within your business? And for us, this is the next step. Yeah.
Derek, your views on?
Yeah, look, I think it is the next step, and I like the big green button thing. I wish I had one in several places because it would solve a whole lot of problems. But I think where it is actually at the moment is it's actually using some of the smart tools and the technologies to almost automate a lot of the background checks and those kind of things is actually where it is actually at today, and what people should be thinking of is you can do the integration, you can get the things working together, but it's actually going, how do I now know what's going wrong and automate that piece of it so then I can put someone in to fix it? And that's almost at the step at the moment. How do I know I haven't supplied something? How do I know I'm not complying with a piece of legislation or something? But actually at the moment, the very immediate future I go is actually you look at how you automate the detection of problems so you can then react to them quickly, as opposed to the big green button, which isn't quite there yet.
Okay, audience, reminder, we've got 15 minutes left till we'll shut down. So many of these topics that are, pushing buttons for you in your own environment, very happy to address those. I guess the proposition, as Matthew has sort of outlined, is that you need, as a prerequisite going into digital transformation initiatives, and the audience, I'm sure, will be at various stages in that process. establishes a foundational capability, and postmodern ERP is really it's kind of a prerequisite. In order to see yourself in the future with a big green button, you need to have modernized your systems. Or do you? Is integration the answer? And actually it's your integration skill set and technology capabilities on that front that is going to be the differentiator. So maybe across the floor, again, just your perspectives on is ERP a prerequisite, and if it is, well, obviously it is, but if it's not, then what are the alternatives? Not everyone can re-engineer their ERP every day. So Brett, maybe you take that one. You've obviously made that decision already.
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said, it was the second key principle of our decision when migrating, is that we were not going to re-engineer the ERP. We don't spend the kind of money that we do on licensing, nor does Infor spend the millions and millions of dollars a year that they spend on development, nor their competitors for that matter, only to be turned around and told that it's all wrong and we need to develop it, or customize it significantly. It takes a great deal of company strength from a cultural perspective to go, you know what, we will re-architect our business to fit within a standard model, and to be able to genuinely question and empower your staff to go, you know what, you might have done it like this for 30 years, but tomorrow you're doing it differently. But here are the benefits. So, for us it worked. And we're a relatively small business, 80 odd people across Australia and New Zealand. So I'm not saying that would have been as easy if you had 8,000 or 80,000, staff. But if you're looking to try and be agile, to be responsive, to reduce your operational costs and to focus on stuff that matters, then you've got to take away some of the complexity that we naturally build into our businesses, over time. And that would be my advice to anybody, is that, there's that three-legged stool of people, process and tools, right? But, if you've got well-engaged people and you've got mature, robust processes with a level of discipline that enables you to make the most of that process, then the tool just speeds everything up, right? You can't put in a tool with bad processes and think that all of a sudden you're going to get a good process. It just doesn't work that way. So, focus and good luck.
Yeah, I'd agree with that entirely. The process is the key. I mean, sooner or later you're going to have to fix an ERP if you don't have a good, stable ERP. But you need to figure out what your process is, and you need to figure out what you're doing. And if you do have an ERP that has a problem, don't try and resolve it by building something else somewhere that does the same type of job. Actually go, it's my ERP, it's my problem. I may fix it later, but I will fix it, and I'm going to keep it that is the core of what it should be doing. But the process is the thing, and making small steps. And you can make them anywhere, but it's kind of doing it within a context of knowing what an ERP is for, and going, I'm not going to try and redo that or build bits of it somewhere else to fix it. Sooner or later you will have to fix it, but yeah, I'd agree with Brett. Process is the king. Get that right, understand what you're really trying to do, and that will then drive your information, and that will then drive your tools.
Yeah, Jerry, you find organisations that have been through a project with a major implementation, it may amount to be ERP, but there's a significant implementation that has affected a lot of the organisation. Are they in a better mindset to transform in the future?
They are, if they've honestly looked at what it's actually done to them and where it caused them problems. And a lot of the times, these days the technology will work one way or the other. It's actually comes back to what it does to the organisation, how the organisation has to change in areas, or the decisions it's made to actually do things that it probably shouldn't have done. And that's where, like I said, it comes back to process and information to a fair degree. Most modern tools are pretty good at what they do. It's what do you want to do with them?
Matthew, your perspective on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just to reinforce what's already been said, really, is that the ERP will always exist because at some point in the business you need a source of regulatory and compliance. that comes from information confidence. And in order to have that information confidence, you've got to have an element of structured data that you know how it's come to that conclusion. I don't think, whilst AI has proved successful in various areas, in terms of predicting what videos we want to watch and all those sorts of things, at the moment, the challenge is that it's a black box. We can't see how it came to that answer. And I don't know of many tax offices that will accept your return based on an untraceable process that just says, oh, we owe you $36, not the $2 million we paid you last year. So there's got to be that source for at least for the time being. But then I see ERP evolving into NRP, network resource planning, where again, through that interoperability and exposure, we're actually collaborating with data and information that we have confidence in to take those actionable insights, from across the supply chain. So that, instead of the supplier waiting to the last minute to tell us that there's a bit of a delay because they know it's going to be a headache, if they tell us early on, maybe there are other things we can do, other elements of spare capacity in our supply chain and elsewhere that we can achieve the same outcome with our customer, or at least satisfy the customer at that point in time, and do that collaboratively, cooperatively across the network. But at the same time, as I say, you still need to have something that I can go back to in case of traceability requirements, in case of that regulatory or compliance issue that needs to be honed down to who did what and when. And the main source for that today is an ERP platform. And the risk with being a totally open and integrated solution set is where's the points of control. And if you've got a complete understanding and, truly communicated and educated across your business, you might achieve that outcome. But there's a lot of risk in there. And that's to Brett's point there, that's where companies like Infor have invested, millions and in our case, billions of dollars to make our solutions industry last mile facing, and then also providing the extensibility tools to then say, well, if you do need a bit of a nuance on that, you can do that, but without customization, by keeping to the core business rules that were defined, and so providing that traceability back to why was that decision made.
Yeah, I guess the process conversation, which obviously a recurring theme, it's all about process and the human side of process. Is processes can be enabled when technology is taken away, and there's no longer a constraint that you can pretty much deliver whatever the optimized process is. Forget about technology and how the technology does it, which pretty good place to be, right? Without this being an ad, it definitely, those constraints, a lot of organizations, I think they blame their technology on why they can't do things. So it's a change in mindset to get past that. Look, all right, I think without questions from the floor, anything pressing from you guys that you want to bring in while we're still going? Otherwise, I'll bring things to a close. Nothing there. So Matthew, you have got control, but I'll just do a quick thanks. If you flick the slide over, not that it's going to show very much other than a thank you to Infor, obviously a sponsor for today's event, and hopefully we still managed to get away with without it being a no sales pitch. Not really wasn't intended to be a sales pitch. It is about the foundational technology and allowing digital transformation. So hopefully the audience has come away with that impression. But thanks to Infor. I deal with Infor out of Sydney, but they have a network of offices around ANZ and partners as well. EMDA is one that we work with locally here. So yeah, get in touch with them through infor.com, and it's an Australian site that has all of their local assets. Lots and lots of material there, and a big stable of products across industry verticals. So yeah, go and check out their cloud suite solutions. Okay, and it just flick again, Matthew, if you will. Just before you, or as you go out of the webinar today, you'll get a little survey just to really appreciate your feedback and your impressions of today, and any ideas you've got for future events. I'm very keen to hear that. Thank you very much to the panel, Brett, Derek and Matthew. Good insights, and thank you for your time today, and to the audience, thanks for taking time out of your day to listen in. We'll be in touch, as I say, follow up with the recording, and Infor will send you the PowerPoint. It's got a couple of the clicking through onto the strangely shaped wheels, being one that provided me some entertainment anyway. So we'll get that through to you. Okay, all the best. Thanks for joining. Over and out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.